What if I told you that one of the largest cats to ever walk the earth was not a saber-tooth, not a tiger, and not even the famous cave lion? Hundreds of thousands of years ago, across prehistoric Europe and northern Asia, there lived a gigantic lion-like predator so massive that even the biggest cats alive today would have looked small beside it. Its name was Panthera fossilis, often called the Mosbach lion. Most people know Smilodon because of its enormous canine teeth. Others have heard of the American lion or the legendary Ice Age cave lion. But Panthera fossilis is rarely mentioned, even though it may have been one of the most impressive members of the cat family. And there is actually some debate about what this animal should be called. For many years, Panthera fossilis was treated as a separate ancient lion. But more recent research often places it within the evolutionary lineage of the cave lion, Panthera spilia, treating it as an early form or chrono-subspecies rather than a completely separate species. So the scientific name may be debated. But the animal itself was very real. And it was enormous. The story takes us deep into the Pleistocene. Ancient members of the lion lineage had expanded across Eurasia, eventually reaching enormous areas of Europe and Asia. Fossils belonging to early cave lion forms have been discovered across this vast region, showing that these cats were incredibly successful predators. By the Middle Pleistocene, they were living in a world filled with giant herbivores, dangerous carnivores, and early humans. And this was not simply a modern lion living in colder weather. Panthera fossilis was built on a completely different scale. Some of the largest fossil individuals have been estimated at roughly 2.5 to 2.9 meters in head and body length, with shoulder heights approaching 1.4 to 1.5 meters. High-end mass estimates for exceptional individuals can reach around 400 kilograms, with some estimates going even higher depending on which bones and methods are used. But this is important. These numbers represent exceptionally large animals. They should not be treated as the normal weight of every Mosbach lion. Still, even with that warning, we are talking about one of the largest cats known from the fossil record. Research on the cave lion lineage also shows that the earlier Middle Pleistocene forms could be substantially larger than many of their later descendants. Put that into perspective. A large modern male lion is already terrifying. A giant tiger is even more intimidating. But an exceptional Panthera fossilis may have carried several hundred kilograms of muscle, bone, and teeth in a single body. Standing beside a human, its shoulders could have reached around chest level. And when it raised its head, the animal would have appeared absolutely massive. Yet size was not the only thing separating it from later lions. When paleontologists compare fossils of early and later cave lions, they find differences in the skull and teeth. Panthera fossilis had several more primitive characteristics, including differences in its incisors, premolars, and other parts of the skull. Later cave lions developed their own specialized features. But these differences were not enormous. And that is exactly what makes the story interesting. Rather than one giant species suddenly disappearing and another appearing from nowhere, scientists have suggested that Panthera fossilis and later cave lions may represent different stages of one long evolutionary lineage. In other words, the famous cave lion may have descended from cats even larger than itself. But what did the Mosbach lion actually look like? That question is harder to answer. No prehistoric human left us an accurate painting of Panthera fossilis itself, so we do not know its exact coat color or pattern. But later cave lions were represented in prehistoric artwork. And those images give us an intriguing clue. Some cave paintings show lions without the enormous flowing mane seen on many modern African male lions. Genetic and fossil research also supports the idea that cave lions formed a distinct lineage separate from modern lions. So if the earlier Panthera fossilis looked similar to its later relatives, imagine an enormous, muscular lion-like cat with a long powerful body, huge limbs, a relatively simple coat and possibly little or no large mane. Not a fantasy monster. Just a cat. But scaled up to frightening proportions. Now imagine seeing one walking toward you across an open landscape. Because prehistoric Europe looked nothing like the Europe we know today. Depending on the exact place and period, these landscapes contained deer, horses, bison, wild cattle, wild pigs, rhinoceroses, and enormous prehistoric elephants. This was a world of giants. And a predator as large as Panthera Fossilis needed prey capable of feeding that giant body. It probably was not spending most of its time chasing tiny animals. Large ungulates would have offered a much better reward. Young, injured or vulnerable members of even larger herbivore species may also have been potential targets. But hunting was only half of the problem. Because Panthera Fossilis was not alone. And this is where prehistoric Europe becomes truly terrifying. There were other powerful carnivores sharing these landscapes. Wolves, large bears, hyenas, other pantherine cats. And during parts of the Pleistocene, the terrifying saber-toothed cat Homotherium. So imagine Panthera Fossilis successfully bringing down a large animal. The hunt is finished. But the danger isn't. The smell of blood spreads through the landscape. Other predators begin arriving. Suddenly, the animal that just fought to kill its prey might have to fight again simply to keep it. A carcass in prehistoric Europe could become a battlefield. And an enormous body would have been a serious advantage. A large cat could intimidate smaller competitors. But numbers could change everything. Several scavengers working together could make even a giant predator uncomfortable. This brings up another mystery. Did Panthera Fossilis live in groups? Modern lions are famously social, but we cannot automatically copy modern lion behavior onto an animal that lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. Direct evidence for the social structure of Panthera Fossilis is extremely limited. It may have shared some behaviors with later lions. Or its lifestyle may have been different. And until new evidence appears, we simply do not know. But now we need to add another animal to this ecosystem. One that would eventually become more dangerous than any giant cat. Humans. Not necessarily Homo sapiens at first. Much of the history of Panthera Fossilis happened before modern humans became established across Europe. Instead, these giant cats encountered earlier human populations. And those humans had something no lion possessed. Tools. Planning. Cooperation. And the ability to turn sharp pieces of stone into weapons. At first, it seems obvious which animal should have been more dangerous. A gigantic lion weighing several hundred kilograms against a relatively fragile primate? You would probably bet on the lion. But archaeological evidence gives us a surprising twist. At the Grandolina site in Spain, researchers studied remains attributed to a Middle Pleistocene lion. And some of those bones contained cut marks. Marks produced by stone tools. The evidence indicates that ancient humans processed the lion's carcass. Researchers have even described the discovery as evidence involving a hunted hunter. Exactly how the animal died is more difficult to prove beyond all doubt. But one fact is clear. At some point, humans gained access to the body of one of the most dangerous predators in their environment and butchered it. Think about that for a moment. This was a cat capable of killing a human almost instantly. One swipe. One bite. One badly timed encounter. Finished. Yet early humans were already beginning to rewrite the rules of the food chain. Individually, humans were weak compared with these giant predators. But humans did not depend on strength alone. They had communication, tools, memory, planning, and cooperation. Those advantages would eventually become far more powerful than claws. And while humans continued changing, the lions were changing too. Over hundreds of thousands of years, the massive early cave lion form was gradually replaced by later forms of Panthera spilea. Research into their fossils suggests a broad long-term trend toward decreasing body size. That does not mean every generation simply became smaller. Evolution does not work like a straight line. Different populations could vary enormously. Some individuals remained huge. But overall, the gigantic proportions seen in some Middle Pleistocene lions became less common in later populations. Why? There probably was not one single reason. Climate changed repeatedly during the Pleistocene. Grasslands expanded and contracted. Forests moved. Temperatures rose and fell. Prey populations changed. Competitors disappeared from some areas and entered others. And when the environment changes, being bigger is not always better. A gigantic predator requires enormous amounts of food. If large prey becomes less available, a smaller body can sometimes become an advantage. So the enormous Mosbach lion was eventually followed by later cave lions that were generally smaller, although still extremely impressive animals. And those cave lions became incredibly successful. Panthera spilea eventually occupied an enormous geographic range extending across much of Eurasia and into Beringia. Ancient DNA shows that cave lions formed distinct populations across this huge territory. They were among the dominant predators of the northern Pleistocene world. But even their success could not last forever. Near the end of the Pleistocene, ecosystems across the northern hemisphere began changing dramatically. Many large mammals disappeared. Prey communities shifted. Human populations expanded. Habitats changed. And eventually, the cave lions disappeared too. Genetic and fossil research places their last occurrence near the end of the Pleistocene, roughly 14,000 years ago in Eurasia. A lineage that had survived enormous climatic changes and dominated parts of the world for hundreds of thousands of years was gone. And that makes Panthera fossilis even more fascinating. Because it represents an early stage of that incredible dynasty. This cat lived in a Europe where giant elephants, rhinoceroses, wild cattle, hyenas, saber-toothed cats and early humans could all exist within the same prehistoric world. And at its greatest size, Panthera fossilis pushed the basic body design of a lion to an extreme rarely seen anywhere in the cat family. But was it actually the biggest cat that ever lived? That question is much harder to answer than it sounds. Fossil animals are often known from incomplete remains. We do not have hundreds of perfectly preserved Panthera fossilis skeletons that can simply be placed on giant weighing scales. Scientists estimate body mass using measurements from bones and comparisons with living animals. And different methods can produce different results. Then there are other contenders. The enormous South American saber-toothed smilodon populator. The American lion, Panthera atrox. And unusually large individuals belonging to several other extinct cat lineages. So declaring one animal the absolute largest cat ever discovered can be misleading. The safer statement is this. Panthera fossilis was one of the largest cats known to science. And honestly, it does not need the #1 title to be terrifying. Picture an enormous lion-like predator approaching 1.5 meters at the shoulder. Several hundred kilograms of muscle. Powerful jaws. Heavy limbs. A massive skull. Now place that animal in a landscape filled with rhinos, giant cattle, elephants, hyenas, and saber-toothed cats. Then imagine being an early human standing beside a water source. And finding its footprints in the mud. Fresh footprints. You do not know where the lion is. You only know it has been there recently. That was the world Panthera fossilis belonged to. And perhaps the most fascinating thing about this animal is that it was not simply an evolutionary dead end. It appears to represent part of the foundation of the cave lion lineage that would later spread across much of the northern world. The Mosbach lion was essentially an early giant in an Ice Age dynasty of predators. Today, that entire cave lion lineage is gone. Only modern Panthera leo remains from the living lion branch. But fossils remind us that lions once existed in forms far more massive and across territories far larger than what we see today. Panthera fossilis was one of those lost giants. Not a monster. Not a fantasy creature. And definitely not some ridiculous dinosaur-sized cat. It was something much more interesting. A real predator. A giant lion shaped by an ecosystem where prey was enormous, competition was brutal, and losing control of a carcass could mean going hungry. For hundreds of thousands of years, this animal stood near the top of one of the most dangerous ecosystems mammals have ever created. And very few creatures would have willingly challenged it. So now I want to know. If you were standing in Pleistocene Europe and had to encounter just one of these predators, Panthera fossilis, Homotherium, Smilodon, or a giant cave bear, which one would you choose? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to discover more prehistoric animals that were bigger, stranger and far more dangerous than their modern relatives, subscribe. Because the Ice Age still has plenty of monsters left for us to meet.